Good afternoon, everyone. Yes, I'm an attorney. Please don't hold it against me. Actually, a pretty nice guy. I'd like to thank the organizers of this event. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you all today and to celebrate this very significant work conducted by Professor Michael Burkle. It's really an honor for me to be a part of this project, not only in terms of having the opportunity to share my views about my faith with others, but also because this collection of narratives from American Muslims I know is so much needed today. I think the premise, or at least an anticipated result of this project, was to show how different the views and understandings of American Muslims are about their faith when compared with what is normally depicted in the media or in popular culture. For those who have not had personal experiences or exposure to American Muslims, I expect this book will come as a real surprise. Rather than strict and rigid interpretations of rituals or dogma that many people associate with Islam, the reader very quickly realizes that, at least for these contributors, Islam is a spiritual faith that's based on reason and rationality, that provides nourishment for the soul and guidance for how to achieve closeness to God, and also how to live one's life so that one may help one's neighbor. And the exposure to this understanding of what Islam is and what it entails could not be any more timely. Recent polls, and this is from the Washington Post, show that nearly half of Americans, 49%, have a negative view of Islam. More than a quarter, 26%, admit to having some level of prejudice against Muslims. And these statistics are actually from a few years ago, and many believe them to be actually even higher today. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission reported that although Muslims make up about 2% of the American workforce, 25% of the charges of discrimination were based on bias towards Muslims. And we recently saw 2/3 of Americans, 66%, opposing efforts of Muslims to build a community center, which also happened to have a prayer area included, 2 blocks away from Ground Zero because it was considered to be too close. And remarkably, despite all of this negativity and hysteria about Islam and Muslims, we were still able to get a Muslim elected as president of the United States. I'm joking, of course. But in all seriousness, we can see how much this other narrative, that from American Muslims themselves, is needed in order to balance this very one-sided perception of this religion. And I believe there is another beneficial result from this work as well, one that was probably not intended. And that is the appreciation of the diversity of thoughts and opinions for Muslim readers themselves. Quite often, Muslims themselves neglect the rich diversity of opinions from within their community. And I believe many Muslims reading this book will be very intrigued to see some of the alternative interpretations on various subjects presented in the book. Professor Muhammad Hassan Khalil's contribution is a perfect example. It provides an excellent account of the view concerning salvation in Islam not being limited to Muslims, but being available to persons of other faiths as well. And although I personally also hold this view, I know it is considered a minority opinion within the Muslim community. In my presentation, I spoke about the concept of finality of prophethood in Islam. And I touched on the differences between the two Ahmadiyya groups and their different understandings of this concept. Again, many Muslims are not even aware that there are 2 Ahmadiyya groups and the fundamental differences between the two concerning this issue. And I think it is important to also point out just how integral a work like this, Quran in Conversation, is to this post-9/11 world that we live in. It is commonly understood that this war on terror that the West is engaged in cannot be accomplished by military force alone, but it rather requires addressing these extremist ideologies that terrorists espouse. And this book does that in many ways. It addresses many of the misunderstood concepts that extremists promote for their own political ambitions, whether it's the concept of jihad, the status of women in Islam, or the fundamental notions of justice and compassion and mercy in Islam. This book contains rebuttals to these types of extremist ideologies. So again, it's a very useful tool for not only educating non-Muslims about this faith, but also Muslims as well on some very important topics. And for the large number of non-Muslims who have simply not had the opportunity to know a Muslim in a personal capacity, and whose only exposure to Muslims is what is shown on TV or in movies like the recent hit American Sniper. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people like this. This book provides that personal connection. And in the Columbus area, where I currently reside, I've been called from time to time by local pastors of churches who are friends of mine to meet with a congregation member who may have a very critical view of Islam and has never had the opportunity to sit down and actually get to know a Muslim. And the results has been very encouraging. I often, receive comments like, "You're not what I expected," or "You seem so normal," or "I like this one, you'd make a good Christian." And, I believe this book serves as the very next best thing to having that real-life connection. It's like being introduced to 24 American Muslims, possibly while over having a cup of coffee and hearing what they have to say about their faith. Just one last point I'd like to make is that for me, and I wouldn't be surprised for other contributors as well, I feel like I actually learned more from Professor Burkle in this process simply through his attentive listening than he may have through my spoken words. The sincerity and compassion with which he wanted to learn from his contributors is something very few people have the ability to do, and I think that's very much reflected in the end product of this book. I jokingly had mentioned to Professor Burkle this past summer that it was almost therapeutic for the contributors to be able to have someone sit down and just wanting to learn and listen with all of the misunderstandings about this faith and the insinuations, just being able to express what one believes about their own faith. I thank you very much, and it's been humbling and a great honor to be a part of this project. Thank you.